Ko Moana Maki.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, ngā mihi nui mō te wiki o te reo Māori. The problem with that speech is that's not what this bill does at all, not even vaguely. And I mean, the disestablishment of the Families Commission is not something that the Labour Party necessarily has a problem with. In fact, it was our policy at the last election. It's what you replace it with that is key. And what we're replacing the current Families Commission with this watered-down, weakened Families Commission, is not a good step forward for families. It seriously undermines the advocacy role, the independent advocacy role of the Families Commission, and makes it something more akin to a government department. If that's what the government wants, then just roll it into MSD and put the funding there. But that's not what they're doing. They're keeping this fig leaf of a commission, fig leaf of autonomy, and yet right the way through the bill, there's constantly sprinkled the phrase, on behalf of government, government's priorities. That's not autonomy. That's not autonomy at all. That is simply another government entity controlled by government, which is not what the Families Commission was set up to do. So we supported the bill to select committee because we wanted to look at what the changes would mean, at the role of evaluation and research within the Families Commission and where that would now sit, about the reporting around outcomes. And unfortunately we now have to oppose this bill because it is a step backwards for the Families Commission. And the cut in funding for the Commission is also going to severely limit the role of the Commission, especially now that they're being required to produce an annual family status report. Well, we have to ask ourselves why the government got rid of producing the social report through MSD every year and will now be doing that every 3 years, a report which was providing good information on how government and government departments and all the relevant government entities were doing and dealing with the issues facing not just families but all of our community. That's gone. It's now only every 3 years. It's now being replaced with this family status report. But the funding that would be required to actually do that work in a robust manner is not being provided. In fact, the Commission's funding is being halved. And there's nothing wrong with parenting courses, and there's nothing, and more assistance for youth mental health is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's just a distraction away from what we're actually doing to the Families Commission, which is the issue that we're discussing under this bill, which is slashing its funding, reducing its ability to advocate on behalf of families and limiting its independence. And what's happening is where we had 7 commissioners before, that recognised the complexity of the issues facing families. So we had people who covered a broad range of disciplines, particularly in the research field, all of which were relevant to families, all of which had something to bring to the table in terms of advocating for good policy for families. Well, now we've got 1 commissioner. I'm sorry, there is absolutely no way that 1 commissioner can have the required depth of understanding across the broad range of disciplines that the Families Commission covers, which just shows how the complete lack of respect for evidence-based policy making from this national-led government. Because if they did respect good research and having good research underpinning policy for families, then they would not be moving from having 7 experts to 1. 7 experts to 1. Because even our Prime Minister's Science Advisor, Peter Gluckman, even he doesn't have the experience across all the disciplines that we're talking about that are currently represented. He's a very knowledgeable man and very useful to have there, but I think even he would acknowledge that the broader the range of disciplines represented, the better. And I notice that he is one of the people that is going to be on the Social Science Experts panel. It's mentioned the PM Science Advisor. What if the next PM Science Advisor has nothing to do with family research? What if the late Sir Paul Callaghan had been the science advisor? With his experience in physics, would he still have been on the social science research panel? So I hope the flexibility is there in case the next science advisor doesn't have an expertise in the area of families or child development as Sir Peter Gluckman has. And I suspect that's how short-thinking this bill is, that we're not even thinking to what discipline. It might be an astrophysicist. It might be, for my discipline, a biochemist, and that would be a wonderful and beautiful thing. But perhaps not the best person to sit on the social science experts panel. And that just says to me that this hasn't been thought through properly. And you see that again in the very, very confused governance structure of this organisation. We're not clear whether the Families Commissioner will actually be the chair of the board. we don't actually know what the role of the Families Commissioner is. Now, the National Government keeps saying, oh, this is just like all the other commissioners. This is just like bringing it into line with the other commissioners. That's actually not true. Their roles are clearly defined in legislation. The role of the Families Commissioner is no longer defined in legislation. There is a confused governance structure. We're not clear what the role of the various parts of the organisation now are. The Chief Executive role is retained. It appears from first reading that it's the Chief Executive that might be the chair of the board and not the Families Commissioner. This is very, very confused lawmaking and will not result in good outcomes. And as the member before said, lean and efficient outcomes from the Families Commission. In fact, I suspect it will be the exact opposite as they muddle their way through trying to work out who is in charge of doing exactly what in this new and confused structure. The other thing that worries me is the new Social Policy and Evaluation Unit within the Commission. And it says this will provide independent monitoring and evaluation of programs and interventions in the social sector. Well, that's all very well and good. It's now sitting within the unit, so I have to question how independent it is, given that this unit is now far more beholden to government than the Families Commission once was. Because, of course, currently the Commission uses peer reviewers from universities, from other research centres and independent experts. They don't just use the people they have within their own commission. They go broader outside to really maintain that independence and get that expertise, and that is now not going to happen. But the Social Policy and Evaluation Unit, whereas currently now the Families Commission has the independence to identify where the gaps in research are, and child poverty is a good example of where the government is not putting a focus on research, and where the Families Commission will step in and say this is somewhere where we need some robust independent research so that we can have good evidence underpinning good public policy. Well, now, where the Families Commission has this function of identifying opportunities for evidence and research, it is now only where it will assist in achieving the government's priorities in the social sector, commissioning research on behalf of government and managing contracts on behalf of government. That's not independent at all. So currently they can go out and see where government is failing to step up to the mark in protecting our families, where the government is failing to do the research because they don't want people to know what's going on out there. They know that the evidence will show that they are not taking issues like child poverty seriously enough, so they do not want that research done. They do not want that evidence pointing to their utter failure as a government to address the growing inequality in this country, the growing inequality within families, and the increase in child poverty. They don't want that research done. So they are changing the rules for the Families Commission to say that they can only identify gaps where they are working to achieve the government's priorities. That is unacceptable, completely unacceptable. So, Mr Speaker, it is a shame. As I said, we have no issue with the disestablishment of the Families Commission if what was being put in place was going to guarantee better outcomes for families and for children in this country. And the key question is, what are you replacing it with, Mr Speaker? What is the government replacing it with? They're replacing it with a fig leaf that is going to be hamstrung, that is not going to be independent, that is not going to be allowed to carry out research where it feels that the government is falling through the gaps, which is shambolic in its structure, which is going to cause enormous uncertainty and which is limiting the pool of experts within the Commission across the broad range of, and the number of disciplines. You only have to look at that Otago University longitudinal study to see just the incredible range of disciplines that are included when you're talking about families. So to go from 7 commissioners, that's the hard ask, to get that broad range of disciplines represented effectively amongst 7 commissioners down to 1, just shows how little and how scant regard this government has for peer-reviewed independent research underpinning good public policy.
Speaker.
I call Alfred Narrow.
Tēnā koe te rangatira.